looking at. Some of you know through prior experience, and you still can. But, my name's James Arrowood. It was my fortune to teach here for 11 years before losing my breath and, and having to retire. If I start talking too much, you'll see me inch over towards my little lungs sitting here on the piano, and I'll gas up again. But hopefully, as long as I'm sitting still and not misbehaving, I can usually do pretty good on room air. I was director of bands here for 11 years and enjoyed it very much. Prior to that, I taught at several other universities over my career of 33 or so years. And 9 of those years of my experience was in public school teaching in the schools of Virginia. And so I came to what came to be called CMP, or Comprehensive Musicianship Through Performance, kind of on my own, as did everybody else during that time period. And as I came to the end of my days as a public school teacher and began to teach in higher education, I found out that a group had been founded in the state of Wisconsin to address this very thing. I first came in touch with the concept. It wasn't called Comprehensive Musicianship Through Performance, but there was a book called Teaching Musicianship in the High School Band. And I'm one of these people who enjoys reading a lot, and I take chances on books, and I lived in a rural area. And so I would just order, I hear about something secondhand, or I'd read about it in those days, what was called the MENC Journal. Since MENC's changed its name, I guess it's still called the Journal, though, right? And so I would order books, and then of course you get on somebody's list, and then you get stuff from advertisers, you know. And I would take chances, and I figured, well, if I learn one thing from this book, or 2 things, it's worth the investment. Sometimes I would get books that would, you know, particularly in instrumental music, marching band, that sort of thing, where I'd already accomplished what was in the book, but it was worth the chance. Well, one of those books I kind of bought sight unseen. It was called Teaching Musicianship in the High School Band by Joseph Labuta. It was terrific. It just began to help me think in a whole lot of different ways about teaching instrumental music in my case. But you could have taken those concepts into choral music as well. And although it said to use that 4-letter word band, you could think about it also for orchestra. Although the specifics in regard to repertoire were different, the concepts and the ideas were terrific. The book went out of print for a number of years, and people kept talking about it who were acquainted with it. And I'm happy to say it came back into print in a revised and updated edition just a few years ago, so it's now available again. But one of the things that turned me on was a chart that was in the book, a single page, which I photocopied there. And it had the various historic epochs, starting with the Baroque period, classical, romantic, and contemporary, as it was called several decades ago, which was basically the 20th century. And it had concepts about the music from those various historic periods, and a representative listing of composers. And I thought, gee, how can I get this quite literally in front of my students, rather than giving it out on a photocopy like this, which they probably would not memorize and wouldn't be carrying with them every day. So my wife is quite, unlike me, I can hardly read my own handwriting if I get more than 2 years away from it and go, gee, what was I writing? You know, as I look through some of my old folders and things. She has wonderful penmanship. So we went out and bought a whole series of poster boards. I'm looking now for the handout I just gave you. I thought I had a copy of it in here, and by the time this presentation's over, I will have found it. So we bought these big pieces of poster board, about like this. I don't know, 12 of them or so. So we made this huge chart. It was bigger than this board, about this wide across, but a little higher. And she went right across and copied this almost exactly, but I added and subtracted a couple of composers since I taught band that almost all the composers were there, but there were a few more I wanted to use. Happily, on this list, you can see, this was from a band book as well. These composers all wrote music for winds, but I updated a couple of things as well. And I remember that Baroque, I chose colors to represent each of the periods. So, I don't know, what color would you choose for Baroque music? This is a poster. Goes up in the band room above the board, so that all the students, the ensemble room I taught in was elevated, and I was in the pit, so to speak. And so the students would literally see right over my head. They'd have to look down on me as I was conducting. So it was right there in front of them all the time. So if you had to choose a color for Baroque, what would you have chosen? This isn't I mean, you could choose any color. I mean, there's no right color. I happen to think, well, yeah.
Blue.
Well, okay. If I recall, I chose blue for classical. But you can choose blue. True blue. Yeah, well, I chose, how about romantic?
Red.
Ah, well, that's what I chose for Baroque, was red. You know, the Baroque and Romantic periods are connected, of course. You know, through history, we sort of go through these swings of Apollonian and Dionysian, you know. We go through, right now, we have been in a conservative stage of our politics in this country, and we're moving our way towards a more liberal and progressive stage. But we came out of a liberal and progressive stage, and if you look back through the history, it goes like this all the time. And it does that way in the arts as well. And so the Baroque period, although it started out, we think of all these fugues and everything, growing out of the Renaissance, it evolved into a pretty romantic period. I mean, if you've heard the chromatic fantasy of Bach and all, you know, and we sort of moved into a very lush period. So I chose red, and knowing I chose red for romantic, what would be your second choice for romantic then? I mean, I chose red for Baroque. What would be your second choice for romantic? Pink. Well, I can see that. You're very romantic today. All pink. But you're even more romantic in a way. I chose purple. Talk about passion. Purple passion, maybe. I don't know. But I chose black for a contemporary. But anyway, so you had red, and you had blue, and then this profound purple and black. Sort of the starkness of a lot of contemporary music, particularly at the beginning of the 20th century. And so there that was in front of the students all the time. And so as the days went on, the weeks went on, the years went on, while I was at Culpeper High School in Northern Virginia, if we were working on a fugue, I would say, so the fugue came from what period? And they would all maybe not know the answer, do you suppose? But there it was. And they could go, oh yeah, and you know, we're doing this piece by Bach, and there's his name right over there in the Baroque period. And so you didn't have to keep repeating things, or you remind students of something, you see their eyes go up. It was kind of a teaching tool that was there all the time that began to help them learn and know more about music than just the notes. How many of you were here last year when I gave a similar presentation? I know a few of you were, but okay. You'll hear some of the same, but some different things too. I made fewer of the handouts for those things I know went out last year, but there were a few things that are coming out this year I don't think I handed out last year, so I hope there's enough. Close to enough. Last year, I'm going to start out. I've already started out, so it's already different, right? But last year, I took the presentation I did and took another look at it. And I remember asking those of you who were here, how many of you have ever gone on a vacation, you decide to take a vacation, and you pack everything up. You know, you got your clothes and some of your favorite CDs and some other things. You get in your car with your family or your friends or buddies that are going with you, and you start the car, and you turn around and ask everybody, well, where do you want to go? You know, it's sort of like looking through the wrong end of the telescope. You know, I mean, you kind of decide where you want to go, then you make plans for your vacation. I I've been, as a student, as a youngster, and then through observing, I've seen lots of rehearsals and participated in rehearsals over the time where it just didn't seem like there was much of a goal except getting to the end of the rehearsal or starting at the front and getting to the end of that particular piece of music. And as teachers, of course, we really have to have goals for what we hope our students will achieve. So just as to make a trip, we need a destination and directions about how we're going to get there. As music teachers, we need to have clearly defined goals. That's our destination. And a plan for getting there. This is our directions. And that plan will include sequence, the order that things come in, and the pace of each class rehearsal. And your pace changes in rehearsal, doesn't it? As you get to the end of a rehearsal, you have a different pace than you use at the beginning, and you have a different pace for different types of music. Now we're going to do that really slow tune. It's so beautiful. It's just so, you don't talk that way. Wait. Would you please get out that tune that's so exciting? So hopefully our rehearsals operate the way we operate, and our music making, whether it's singing or playing a machine, hopefully is expressive as we are in real life. Oftentimes with younger students, and sometimes even with older students, they have to be encouraged to be as emotional as they are in real life, as dramatic as they are with their parents. Oh, Mom, gee. And then you give them a flute and they go, ee, ee, ee. Is that, So, encouraging them to do that is part of the whole pacing aspect of what the rehearsal is too. One of the things to know about CMP is that it's a model for planning. It's not a curriculum. A curriculum, of course, is sort of a preordained way of doing things and all the things that you're supposed to do, plus not only what you're supposed to do, but exactly what you're doing. If you are a public school teacher, especially, and you're teaching English, do you suppose you get to pick out what stories you're going to read, what literature you're going to read, what books you're going to read? Of course, the answer is no. There's a text that's been defined by a committee of people long before you got there. Maybe you could be a part of that committee because it does change over time after you've been there a while. And the textbooks are bought, and they're approved by the school board, and that becomes the literature that you're teaching English that you study. If you're teaching math, my wife's a math teacher. She has a little more flexibility because she works with special kids, but there's still that expectation in her advanced geometry that you're going to be at this chapter or finish with this group of theorems, 3 weeks into the semester, and the 4th week you're going to do this, and the 5th week, and there's sort of, that plan's already made. As ensemble teachers, we get to do it all, which is great. But it's also pretty awesome in the real use of the word. It's kind of, hey, awesome, man, old-fashioned now. But back in the 19th century, the word awesome was like profound, overwhelming. It's quite a responsibility because you are deciding whether to do Shakespeare with them in a musical metaphor or whether to do the latest romance novel that's out at the checkout counter, at the grocery store or something. And that is the extreme of music that you will have to choose from. Things that are designed to be consumable, popular-oriented things that might be fun to do, but probably don't have much of a shelf life. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as the next few minutes go by. So I mentioned that the CMP is a model for planning instruction. And as I mentioned before, as you know, it stands for Comprehensive Musicianship Through Performance. And you might think of it as performance with understanding. When a student understands something, they comprehend it. And when a teacher instructs comprehensively, they cover all aspects of the subject. So they're in depth. There's a program that comes on Two of my favorite channels on TV are C-SPAN 1 and C-SPAN 2. And on the weekends they have book TV, and on Sunday nights book notes on C-SPAN 1. In fact, my wife had that bag and I picked it up on the way out. Hey, when'd you get this? I'll bring my stuff over today. Well, they have a program at the beginning each Sunday, the first Sunday in the month, called In Depth. And there's 3 hours with an author. And you just talk about all sorts of things. Or you get to call in and all that sort of thing. And I've always found it really interesting. Well, that's the kind of in-depth experience that you want your students to have with particular pieces of music. And for those pieces of music that you think deserve extra attention, those are the ones that you choose to do a CMP format with. It's frankly impossible. It would be impossible to do this with every piece you ever did. Not every piece that you do, particularly if you're in the entertainment business, and like it or not, band people generally are. There's pep band, and there's oftentimes marching band, and that's okay. But those are things that are out of school. Those are extracurricular aspects of the program. The curricular aspect of the program, that would be like joining the pep club, you know, or something, or what would be a better analogy? Can anybody think of one before me? What would be like a bonus activity after school that might have something to do with what you do in school, but isn't really part of the curriculum? Almost any phys ed thing would be, but physical education is part of the curriculum, whereas athletic programs are after school. They're extracurricular. So phys ed's for all of us because we want to be healthy and strong and eat healthily, know all the bones in the body. But if you decide to go out and punish yourself by playing football, well, that's up to you, you know. That's extracurricular. You're going to...
I was going to say something like a drama club or a debate team.
Okay, anybody have another idea about that one? Drama or debate? Have you ever heard the term co-curricular? In fact, it's become so trendy that Spash now, over 2 blocks away, Spash, of course, most of you know, is the Stevensborn area senior high. They don't even have extracurricular anymore. They just do. They don't have anything that's called extracurricular. Everything's called co-curricular. This is a little off topic, but not really, perhaps. Guess who came up with the term co-curricular? You will never guess if you don't already know. Anybody know? Ross Perot. You remember Ross Perot from a couple of elections ago? With the little voice in the ears and the... Ross Perot, they passed a don't pass, don't play legislation in the 1980s, 20-some years ago, almost 30 now, it was, I think, the early 80s. And if you didn't pass a certain amount of subjects, you couldn't participate in anything that was deemed extracurricular. Well, of course, there were a lot of things deemed extracurricular, just as you were pointing out. They were important and related to the curriculum, such as drama has some aspect of direct relationship to curriculum, particularly literature, but debate even more so, one would think. And then you start thinking about things like solo and ensemble participation, and you start thinking about things like jazz ensembles would meet after school rather than during the school day. And these were things that really enhanced the curriculum. But regrettably in Texas at that time, everything that wasn't part of the school day was called extracurricular. And that would be any orchestra rehearsals after school, any choir rehearsals after school, going to contests, as they used to call it in Texas and sometimes still do. Any event that would happen, so going to contest was like going to play football or something. So if a student was unsuccessful with a couple of their classes, they would be punished by not being able to play clarinet in the band or be able to sing in the choir, which didn't seem the right thing to do. So Ross Perot came up with a concept called co-curricular. So we'll have extracurricular. Those things are wholly extraneous, out of school and not directly related or hardly indirectly related to the curriculum. Co-curricular, those things that are related to the curriculum. And then, of course, the curricular things. Now, the things that happen during the school day are very diverse, aren't they? Study hall happens during the school day. It's part of the curriculum, but it's not academic. So they can be very diverse, but they happen during the confines of the school day. That way, students who maybe were unsuccessful with some of their other courses could still participate in certain activities that enhance their studies, enhance their education somehow, but weren't necessarily a part of the school curriculum. In fact, weren't a part of the school curriculum. And extracurricular we're dealing with. This is nice. This is fun to do. I don't want to go, I could talk about this for an hour because it's really important when it comes to funding and budgetary things and defending things at the school boards and cuts. We just had elections yesterday and finally elected 2 smarter people to join the school board that are presently on it, at least with one exception. So progress is made in little steps. Let's get back to the specificities of working in the curriculum. Because as a music teacher, whether you're a choral conductor, but especially if you're a band director, you're going to have a lot of out-of-school sorts of things going on. So now we're going to pull ourselves, or I'm going to pull us back into the particular topic of what is being done within the confines of the school day. I'd like for you to think, I asked the group last year to think of this. In fact, I'm just going to read to you what I wrote to save words. Think back to your days as a middle school or high school musician. And I hope you are an exception, but as for me, and for other people I know, my ensemble experience incorporated a number of things, a number of experiences, emotional experiences, the old work ethic, practicing and all that sort of thing, teamwork amongst your colleagues that are in the ensemble, and the esprit which that generates. But, aside from accomplishing the first clarinet parts to a number of good pieces, I learned virtually nothing in my 4 years of high school band. And it wasn't just band. I sang in an excellent high school choir and a very good youth church choir, and terrific music. I learned to develop my instrument, or instruments, how to sing this piece or that piece, but I learned nothing about theory or form or structure or anything that was a transferable stylistic trait from one piece to another, or no historical context whatsoever. You name it, it wasn't discussed in my rehearsals or talked about, you know. So in retrospect, my teachers taught performance. They didn't teach music. They taught performance, and music was their vehicle for teaching performance. So I would like to challenge each of you to teach music and use performance as the vehicle by which you teach music. And regrettably, I'd say, well, I don't have a statistic other than most people still teach performance. 85, 90%, I bet. And music's the way they teach performance. Performance is really important, particularly in our art, because music only exists when it's turned into sound. Karel Husa, who's a famous composer, some of you have heard of, but perhaps others haven't. Pulitzer Prize winning composer. He's an old man now. He's written some fabulous pieces. He said, "My music doesn't exist until it becomes sound." Now, I've seen some theoreticians and some musicologists sometimes who might wonder about that, but it's true. Music doesn't exist until it becomes sound. But it doesn't become sound all of a sudden 7:30 Tuesday night, or 7:30 Wednesday night, you know, or just an hour ago in colloquium. Every time we're in rehearsal together, we bring a piece back to life, you know. Even though sometimes it's just the leg or the hand or you know, a portion of it. We bring it back to life. It speaks. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. That's an exciting thing. And it's also, once again, awesome, not only an awesome experience, but an awesome responsibility because, you know, here you've got these little kids in the 9th grade and you're doing a piece by Telemann with them. You know, now, gee whiz, these 9th graders, now they've got to bring Telemann back to life. Can you imagine giving them, well, I was going to say, they could do they might recreate They could do an abstract like Jackson Pollock and probably have the energy to bring it back to life. But you give them a Rembrandt painting and say, now you got to bring this Rembrandt back to life. No one can see it until you paint it. And so you paint it, you know, and here's this Rembrandt, and everybody goes, ah, and then it fades away, invisible paint, goes away, and no one can see it again until some artist brings Rembrandt back to life. That's our responsibility. We bring Bach back to life, Brahms, Beethoven, Stockhausen, Perez, you know, Millau, on into the night. Everybody, George Gershwin, we bring them back to life. So I think it's important that our students learn something not only about playing their clarinet part or their cornet part or whatever it is, but they really learn something about the piece, about the composer, why pieces written by Mozart and Handel sound more similar to each other than pieces written by Stravinsky. I think that the process is important. And CMP is a process, just as rehearsal is a process. Let's take a look now at the plan that you have in your hands. It's not the plan, actually, it's the model. Here's a sheet. But let's take a look at the model. That's what I want to say. This model, if you turn to the flip side, I think it is, yeah, you will see a star on the end. There's a star on the outside, but there's a star on the inside. And each point of the star has a different category. Each one of these categories is a part of the concept, the teaching plan of CMP. And now these 5 points, you can start on any one of them. You can start with any one of them. So looking at the 5 of them, which one do you think you'd be most comfortable starting with? If you were planning something for your students and you're going to think about this as a teaching concept, where would you start, do you think? I say you can choose any 5 of them.
Outcomes?
Outcomes, okay. Why would you want to do that?
It depends what you want the outcome to be.
Yeah.
When you pick one.
Yeah. And there are a lot, particularly as teachers get more and more experienced. This is the one they go to quite often because they think, well, you know, my students don't count as well as they should. And I want a piece that has maybe a little bit of asymmetry or at least some changing time signatures. And that would really help them. So then you go and you start looking for a piece that has a variety of time signatures or some asymmetry in it or something. Or maybe you do a concert band and maybe their tonal quality just isn't very refined. And what can I do with them that will help them with their tonal quality? Well, maybe something slow and expressive. A chorale, well, yeah, a chorale would be nice, but we warm it with chorales. How about something that has more emotion to it and I can work with their tone quality? Then you set about looking for a piece of music that fulfills that criteria. What if you start with what would be another one you could start with? Another point in the plan. Which one do you suppose is the most popular to start with?
Selection.
Well, you start with what you want. What did you say?
Selection?
Selection, yeah, the music itself, yeah. The music itself. Because a lot of times I say, gee, I'd really like to do this piece. I've heard it's exciting, or I played it once a long time ago, and I remember liking it a lot, and so I'm going to start with that. Or you've got a group you've been working with for a couple of years, and they're ready for an exciting challenge technically as well as musically, and boy, here's a piece that technically we've not been able to play, but I bet this is the year for it. And so you start with the music itself. And I would say probably most people have a piece in mind, and they like it so much, they're so committed to it, that they want to deal with it with more depth. So they put the CMP plan to work with that in mind. What would be, pick another one and think about it. Pick one of the 3 we haven't talked about and think how would that be a place to start maybe. How about strategy? An outcome is a goal. An outcome is a goal you have for your student. And that term, you know, first time I heard the term outcome, it was used basically in a musical context. I found out later, now that education in general over the past 15 or so years has adopted that as one of their buzz terms as well. How about strategies? Strategies are ways of getting what you want the outcomes to be. The way you approach it as a teacher, your game plan, so to speak, is your strategy. The how. The outcome's the what, and the strategy is the how you're going to do it. So how might you start with strategy? How might you do that to select a piece of music? It's kind of hard, I think, to think of. Well, what do you do as well?
Well, a lot of people say, you know, they listen to a lot of recordings, like a lot of publishers send out like their recordings of a bunch of pieces that they're publishing, and sometimes I think band directors might use that as a strategy to teach it, you know, have students listen to the recordings of it, and hopefully more than one, but not always, and I think that's very much a teaching strategy that, you know, might help someone choose a piece of
Okay. So yeah, using a recording as a strategy to help them understand the piece. That's true. But what I was thinking of, how if, say if you had no piece of music in mind whatsoever, and you can see where for an outcome, if you knew you wanted the students to achieve something, you go to a piece of music that would help them achieve that. But how would you start with a strategy, a teaching concept that you've already, well, I'm sort of thinking this through, I'm thinking about your thing. You know, I could see where you might say that. One idea that I had was, what are you particularly good at doing? Some people really know how to teach rhythm really well. Some people have terrific ears, better than others, and they're especially good at getting groups to consider intonation and deal with intonation. And so I could think, if you have a teaching strategy that you feel confident with, particularly if you're a newer teacher, I know I can do this and do it really well. And you might look for a piece of music that you could sort of percussion mold, I mean, sort of force fit your own, what you can already do, you know, to help your students progress as well. So you might look for, but I think the strategy part of it would be a least likely place to start, although it's possible to do in that. And an assessment is another one that you might think about. Let's just kind of go through each of these a little bit. Let's look at your first page, because there are lots of neat, helpful hints on each of these pages. Well, I want to say first page. I guess we're going to flip over to where it says music selection. You can read all this as time goes on. The single page that Mike started out a moment ago that says lesson plan, each of these pages that's in the model here is to give you ideas as to how to write a lesson plan. So music selection here. When you're picking the music, you can ask yourself the questions they pose to you. Does this composition teach anything? How does it teach it? What do your students need? Will the knowledge they gain from the composition be transferable to other pieces in a similar style, or in a similar epoch or era, or maybe not even the same era? Perhaps there are similarities, of course, between classical music and what was called contemporary music, I'd say early 20th century music. There are nuances and comparisons between late Baroque music and mid-phase romantic music, you know. So what things are transferable to other pieces of music? Does it have aesthetic value? And you have all these little categories down here, things that you can use as criteria as determining for yourself whether a piece is worthy or not. There are pieces when I was younger that I thought were worthy pieces of music. As I got older, I began to be suspicious about whether the piece was really quite as worthy as I thought it was when I was younger. I began to change my mind about things. There are also pieces that I didn't fully comprehend. I'll tell you a story on myself, even though I'm embarrassed a little bit to admit it. First time I heard the Henneman Symphony, it was on a recording. I knew that it was a terrific piece of music because I heard people talk about it. And of course, now the piece, when I first heard it, how old, let's see, it would have been about 15 years after it was written. So it would have been still a fairly new piece, a long time ago. And so I knew it was terrific. I knew Henneman was a terrific composer and all of that, so I put it on. That's not what I heard. What I heard was, God, it was like a million notes coming at me at once, you know. And of course the clarinet parts are, and the flute is, you know, and all this stuff's mixed up like that. And you look at the score, it looks like Jackson Pollock, you know, all this ink everywhere. Well, I thought, wow, you know, geez, I listened to the first movement. I could hardly get to the end of the first movement. I mean, that wasn't anything to hang on to, you know. And so I thought, rather than just saying, oh man, you turn this thing into a frisbee. We didn't have CDs back then. We had LPs. They made great frisbees. You didn't happen to like what you were listening to. So it was kind of hard on your hand when you went to catch it. But the fact is, I knew it was a worthy piece of music. It was just way over my head, man. I just didn't know where to start. But just put it away, listen to it again later, you know. And so as time went on, of course, I came to the Henneman Symphony. And not unlike drinking coffee, I was slow to drink coffee, too. I was out of college before I learned to drink coffee. I figured if I wasn't going to drive off the road at 3:30 in the morning trying to get home from a gig, I better learn how to drink coffee. And so, but then coffee began to taste pretty good as the years went on, you know. Then I had to break myself from not drinking so much coffee. So, the better things in life are oftentimes that way, including Henneman and other composers. And so there was there was an ad on TV many years ago. Maybe some of you remember it from your childhood, where there's this little baby in his high chair, you know, and all of a sudden this lobster, kaplop, is just thrown right in front of this baby, you know. This baby's looking at this lobster, you know. I don't even remember what the ad was about, but it was sort of the irony of, you know, what's a kid going to do with a lobster, you know. I mean, even if they could get into it, they're not going to like it. And so putting the Henneman Symphony in front of your junior high band is probably not going to be the thing to do. You know, there are stages at which these things happen. But students do need to be challenged. They do need to be challenged. And if you do with your middle school band, one set of Disney tunes after the other, and that's the only experience they get with their band program and similar sorts of things. Maybe instead of doing a Disney tune, you'll do another selection from Spider-Man or something, I don't know. But if this is the only experiences they're getting, it's like having dessert all the time. You know, nothing but dessert. I love dessert. No one likes dessert better than me. But life would be rather short if you did nothing but eat dessert for 2 decades. And so the music needs to be worthy. Let's flip the page to analysis. Now, this is when people oftentimes go, oh, analysis. I can remember, of course, I know it's a lot different here with Dr. Young and all the other wonderful professors we have here. It's not the least bit tedious. It's exciting and everything else. But I can remember some pretty tedious sessions with analysis. My first degree wasn't in music. It was in history and political science, my BA. So I came to music later. So I can remember sort of jumping in ahead of myself in some form and analysis classes. And wow, you know, you're just doing every note of every piece and every chord, and you're looking at it vertically and horizontally all at the same time. And again, it was one of those things I had to bring myself to. As I got older, I enjoyed that more. But that's not the kind of analysis we're talking about here. We're talking about a much broader thing. There's some of that. There's some of that very small minutia that you come to. But just like when you rehearse a piece, you start with the big picture, and then you break it down into chunks. And when you're practicing your own part, then you break it down into smaller pieces. And then after you break it down until you can play everything that's there, then you rebuild it. That's the way you rehearse a piece as well. That's the way you analyze a piece. But not as your students are learning it. You have to do all that in advance before it ever goes out. Because you have to know all this stuff and to accomplish that. Otherwise, you don't know whether it's worth their time or not. The time that you're asking them to spend on it, and the time that you will spend with them on it together. But this is broad-based sorts of things. And so as you look at this, we're talking about such things, well, how would you describe the piece? And I mean, is it an overture, or is it a madrigal, or, is it a symphony? Something as easy as that. Because if you say it's a symphony, now you know it's going to have multiple movements, and the movements are going to contrast, and the keys will contrast in the movements, okay? And then, as in a classical symphony, then we can probably expect the first movement to be sonata allegro form, maybe not, but, and so you already have things to look for. These are things that students, of course, have not a foggy idea, not a clue about. And they don't need to have a theory class under you. But during the course of the rehearsal, I remember studying the fugue with my students, and it was terrific. And boy, there's something you can use every time you do a fugue or any polyphonic piece, whether it's a fugue or not. You can talk about the subject, and they know what you're talking about, and the counter subject, and one thing and another. And it doesn't have to be like a lecture like this afternoon. You can actually have your horn and play and make music and have fun while you're doing it, and be a part of what's going on. So once again, there's an article, you see at the bottom of this, what is the heart of the piece? There was a gentleman who was supposed to be here this semester named Randy Swagan, who's a friend of Professor Keeples. I've known Randy a long time. He's a member of the CMP board. And he wrote an article back in the late 80s or early 90s called The Heart of the Piece. It was republished in 1999. Maybe some of you saw it if you've been here that long, in the State Music Magazine, about the heart of the piece. This is one I think I gave last year. So if you were here last year, you can pass it on. You still got it somewhere in the closet. But I didn't make as many copies. And if somebody gets cheated, we'll have to run a few more copies. I think they're 15 or 16 at least. And so it's a short little article, back and front. In fact, the back's only one column, where he talks about his concept of what the heart of the piece is about. And maybe that's a good place to start in a piece, after you've read through it, and kind of like flipping through a magazine. I don't know about you, but when I read a magazine, I just got a copy of the Heart of Atlantic yesterday, and I didn't start with the cover, and then on that ad, page 2, page 3, and read every word on every page. I flip through it, That's what I did. And when you're sight reading with a group, I think it's good when you start at the beginning to read the whole piece. I mean, there'll be breakdowns, let's start again at rehearsal B. Let's start again at rehearsal D. But it gives the students an idea of what the piece is about. And then you come back through it. Once you have read it, and you already know where the heart is because you've prepared the piece, maybe starting at the heart is a good place to start. This is part of this argument. Because the heart, usually where the climax is. It's usually what the whole piece is about. That's where you're headed. It's not always at the end, but oftentimes toward the end. And so maybe that would be a good place. So I think you'll enjoy that article. Outcomes. I'll talk about outcomes a little bit. You'll see up there in the left hand, over there in the column on your left, sidebar. That's the term I was anxiously hunting for. As I get older, things I've known my whole life not evaporate in my brain. It's called senior moments, I believe. Outcomes are the what, and strategies are the hows. So as you're thinking of outcomes, as you're writing your sort of lesson plan to your, these are the kind of things that you think about when you're deciding, well, what outcomes do you want for this piece? Or if you've already started with the piece, what outcomes can I expect of my students in working in this particular piece? So here's a whole bunch of things to think about. And you can read English, so there's no need for us to talk about them at the moment. Strategies. Sometimes people get strategies and outcomes mixed up. And it's easy to do because sometimes a strategy that you have incorporated as a teacher, you want to, all of a sudden becomes an outcome, an expectation that you have for the students. But just remember that the strategies are how you're going to present it. And sometimes when we think of putting these lesson plans together, there's a tendency to sometimes get one in one category and one in the other. But here are a whole list of things, a whole page of things, strategies to consider in helping your students achieve the goals that you have set for them. Assessment. Assessment, of course, is a form of evaluation, but it's not. It's a form of evaluation, but it's not grading. Grading and assessment are wholly separate things in one regard. Well, I shouldn't say that. They aren't wholly separate, but they're different. When you eventually come to a grade, when it comes down to report cards, and you have to have assessed your students to be able to come up with a grade. But a grade is sort of an artificial figure that is an evaluation of their efforts as well as their accomplishments. But assessment goes on all the time, whether you've thought about it or not. And you're not just assessing your students as individuals and your students in composite as an ensemble, you're also assessing yourself. At least I think every good teacher assesses themselves first. Yeah. So you're in rehearsal and you're thinking, they were together. Why aren't they together? Do I have something to do with that? Am I the reason they're not together? You know? And sometimes the answer might be yes. And sometimes the answer, hopefully, as the years go on, the answer is more likely no. Or else you wouldn't keep doing what it is that you're doing. But even for those who have taught a lot of years, sometimes you just make a mistake. What was it? I did something yesterday. If I think about it too hard, it will waste too much time. Or something and I had to say in rehearsal, oh, that was my fault. You know, let's start over. Or let's start back 3. Oh, I know what it was. I told them to start 6 before the end. And here I was, 7 before the end. What? 7 before the end, and I was 6 before the end. Oh, what's wrong with you guys? You can't read my mind? Jeez. So make sure your mind and your brain, your mouth and your brain are working at the same time. But assessment goes on constantly because you have a sense of whether the students are headed toward that goal. And for ensemble conductors, we're pretty good at doing that as an ensemble. We're less good at doing it with individuals. And it's hard with individuals sometimes because maybe your group has 40 people in it, maybe it's got 80 people in it. And yet each one of them is an individual. And so there are ways you refine your skills as time goes on to be able to do that. But also, this is one of the great things about CMP, is that you are accomplishing things, helping the students accomplish things outside of rehearsal as well as inside rehearsal. So there might be written projects. There will be things to talk about in class. Maybe that sweet little flute player who is destined to always be the 24th flute out of 22 players. I don't know, you know, maybe, but they just love being there. And they want to be there. And so you have to have ways of helping them feel successful in addition to contributing to the ensemble in their own way, and give them an opportunity to be able to succeed in your class, even though it'll be a long time before they get their chromatic scale the way you wish they had it or something. So only basing your grade when I say public schools, I mean school-age kids. It could be parochial schools. It could be any kind of a format. Basing your assessment and your evaluations, ultimately your grade, solely on their ability to perform on the horn or the trombone or to sing, to have a beautiful voice. Maybe they were destined to have a beautiful voice, but these things help them succeed and become more knowledgeable, and the performance becomes better. Another handout. This one went out last year. So you might already have it. These are some resources, some materials and I revised it last year, so this exact thing that it was last year. And these are some resources that I used in rehearsal, and bearing in mind that I was a band director, so you can expect to find lots of bandy things on there. But there are also some things that are wholly, that are music in general and not specifically designed for band. There are a few orchestral things. But some of you might have read some of the books of Tim Lottenheiser, for one, Joy of Inspired Teaching, and some of those are a couple of his books that are on here that would appeal to anyone. The Art of Successful Teaching. And so there are a number of those. What to Listen For in the World by Bruce Adolphe. These are all things. One of the great a book that you should run out and buy before it ever goes out of print called Piano Pieces by Russell Sherman. And then you might not want to read it right now, but read it in 3 or 4 years. And then read it again 5 years later. And then read it again 10 years later. And do I have Parker Palmer's book on here? I don't know that I do or not. The Courage to Teach. Write this down. I don't know if it's on this list. The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer. Again, it's a book. Some of you might want to read it now, but I don't know that you might want to wait. But after you've taught a couple of years, read it. And then 5 years and 6 years later, read it again. And there'll be stuff in there you never saw the first time. They'll be, gee, that wasn't there the first time around. That's the thing about great music, too. Well, where did that come from? Parker Palmer. P-A-R-K-E-R-P-A-L-M-E-R. He lives in Madison, actually. He didn't always live in Madison, but now he does. And it's not a music book. It's about teaching. But it is a music book. It's like the inner game of tennis, It's about tennis, but it's about a lot more than tennis. So, highly recommended. I can tell you that at least 6 or 7 of your professors in this department have read that book more than once. And it's a wonderful thing. So anyway, that's more of a personal odyssey than it is, but it's great with helping people to teach.
Mr. Arrowood, I just wanted to, on behalf of MENC, thank you for coming here. You can continue, but I need to take off for a reversal. So
all right.
Thank you very much for coming here on such short notice. I just emailed him
I
on
was
Sunday night.
glad to be able to do it. Glad to be able to do it. You haven't been signing autographs since you've been on TV. He was on TV last night, and I guess before too. This was a rerun on it.
Yeah, there was. I just do a little thing for MENC on there. So.
Channel 10 on the cable when you don't have anything better to do.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if life really gets boring.
Yeah, really
It was nice. He had a nice videotape he did down in Verona with Verona, John Jorgensen, who was to be here this semester to come and visit. There's going to be an exchange. I think it's going to happen next fall with ensembles here and there and that sort of thing. Some of you know Jason Meyer, the student taught down there last semester. We've had other student teachers over the years. Here's an article that went around last year, and if you were here last year, you already have called Making Rehearsals Comprehensive. And this is one that did not go around last year, called the Wisconsin CMP Project at age 21. It is now age 27. CMP in Wisconsin is 27 years old. The lady who wrote this article back when we were 21 was here as a guest, Laura Sandler. She was here as a guest about 4 years ago, talking about portfolio assessment and other things. At the end of her article, which is short, you will see a lesson plan, a CMP teaching plan, I should say. I used the wrong term. A lesson plan is an individual daily thing. A teaching plan, and I think this is important to I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing. A teaching plan is a plan for a whole series of lesson plans, for a whole experience. So this is her an outline of her teaching plan for a piece by Timothy Broge, Symphonia 6. Also understand that Mary Schmidt was to be here today. Mary Schmidt's much easier on the eyes than I am. She's a wonderful person to boot. She teaches at the Sun Prairie High School. She's a choral conductor at Sun Prairie. I have more than one. And this is a teaching plan that she has of Gustav Holst. Is this out on my wall? Yeah, okay, good. Have any of you seen the CMP video that was done about 6 or 7 years ago? We used to have 2 copies in this department. Hopefully one of them is still around. There are some excerpts on that tape of her teaching of this piece from this plan. So I thought you might like to have that since she couldn't be here today. I'll pass it out. Next time I see her, I'll tell her I passed it out on her behalf. And there's one, if you were here last year, I passed out a teaching plan that I did that was to be published for some other teaching plans. It's much longer than the others because when I submitted the first one, they said, make it even more because we want, you know, it's going to be in sort of a compilation of things that have to do with introducing people to CMP. So if you were here last year, you have it. I only have a few copies because it's longer and not everybody would be interested in it. But it's on the Stars and Stripes Forever, John Philip Sousa. So if you want one of those, there's a few of them here. And if you want one and they disappear, I'm happy to make some more copies. But I'm trying to save the department at least a little bit of money and use about 800 pieces of paper that you've spread out amongst yourselves today. So we saved a little bit. Let me, in closing, put the ball back in your court. But before I do, let me see if there's anything I want to ask you out of the notes I wrote myself. One of the things, first of all, I'll ask one thing, so I'll wait just a moment. These I passed out last year, but there wasn't any need to do it. If you've not been on the web, this is your CMENC webpage for the state of Wisconsin. Kind of look it up. And on there, you can link to a number of different things. That's what it looks like in faded color. And there's the CMP. This is the CMP resources part of the CMENC page. And I think there's a link, but maybe I found it otherwise, at the Department of Public Instruction, DPI as we call it in the trade. And Mel Pontius, for many years, has been head of the music division of the Department of Public Instruction. And there are a number of links there that have to do with Arts Propel and some other things, but there's CMP, restructuring, comprehensive musicianship through performance, a paradigm for restructuring. And it's only 3 pages, but there it is on the web if you want to explore that resource as well. Now, let's see if you have anything you'd like to bring up. And if not, Mike.
How much of the CMP process should you, or could, or will your students be involved in? Besides just, I mean, obviously teaching to them, but how much of actually the process that you go through as a teacher are they involved in? Because I believe one of them said, I think it was assessment on the very beginning, and said, you know, like the students' goals and the students' ways of achieving that.
Right. Well, that would be determined by you as a teacher. And this has just been the most casual of introductions. It's like throwing seeds out on the ground, you know. I would encourage you, after you've, maybe even before you teach, I know some people, at least 1 or 2 of our students have gone either just after their professional semester or just before, but a lot more have gone after they've taught a couple of years to go to one of the summer workshops. There are summer workshops and they take place at different points in the state each year. I mean, it's only one workshop each summer, but it moves around. It was here on our campus a couple of years ago. And it was at St. Norbit's the year before that. I think they went to Whitewater the year after they left here. And it moves around. They were it was Eau Claire the year after they left here. The workshop's about 4 days, 3.5 or 4 days. And there you will write a plan. The people who come, there are 2 tracks. There's a track for those who are just wanting to know about it and learn about it. There's a second track for those who have been in a workshop and then they come back to kind of to move to step 2 or something, you know. And I would suggest you do that. Now, to get back to your question, of course, part of that is you study, well, what kind of strategies can I do? And what goals can I set for my students? And you're asking about strategies because what kind of projects can my students get involved in, you know, in learning this piece? It's not just accomplished with those 45 or 50 minutes you have in the rehearsal, but you have them doing things outside of class and bringing projects back. And there, the variety of things. I mean, it could be playing into, it could be a self-assessment thing, playing into a tape recorder, an excerpt that you've asked them to prepare. It could be a report on that particular piece or a particular composer, or a form, like a variations in what is theme and variations or something. You could have like 40 questions and each student have a different one. I mean, once you start thinking about it, then all of a sudden the sky's the limit in a sense. Of course, it has to be age appropriate, and it has to be not too much for them to handle, but enough that would add to their experience with this particular piece that you're working on. And so there are a variety of things like that. I mentioned portfolio assessment. Is that a term I'm sure everybody's familiar with these days, but used to still be kind of an exotic term 10 years or so ago, unless you were an art student. They've been doing portfolios since the beginning of time. And music people came to it kind of next, I think, and now it's become real trendy throughout education over the past 15 or more years. But portfolio assessment is a great tool to use with CMP because each student builds their own little folio of things, and then you and the student together kind of assess what's going on. And maybe there's not a public presentation, but they've learned something from the experience. And sometimes maybe they'll make a presentation in class. Contract learning is another thing that's, we talked about Jorgensen just a moment ago down at Verona. It's a wonderful concept of contract learning. We just wondered, he has the students doing bazillions of things in the course of his ensembles. And so there are lots of ways that one can incorporate a comprehensive approach within their program. I know it's not a specific answer, but after you look through some of these materials too, all of a sudden the light bulbs will start going off. And watching that video, although it's the video, it's a kind of an amateur video in a way. At the same time, you get to see what's going on in classrooms, because these are actual kids, actually playing and singing. They're on the video. Takes what, 30 minutes, maybe 25 minutes, not very long. And have you seen it? Yeah. Okay. So you have a sense of at least a few things that are being accomplished within the classroom, but not so much, I guess, when I think about it, outside the classroom. Other questions? We have 6 whole minutes or so. I want you to think about a couple of things. Scott Teeple, when he was doing his professional semester, left Michigan to come to Wisconsin and did his student teaching, as some of you might know, at West High School in Madison. There was a wonderful teacher there for a lot of years who finally retired about 4 or 5 years ago, named John Rayford. I have a photocopy from a page out of one of his programs. We, some of you, let's see, no percussionist in here. We had a percussionist whose student taught at West about the time Professor Teeple did too. Anyway, this is from that vintage. This is from the early 90s or late 80s, this program. And he has a philosophical statement at the bottom of his program. Music education, notice he didn't say band. Music education at West High School is based on the belief that all students should have access to a comprehensive and sequential instruction program which, bullet, encourages talent and special interest, seeks to advance musical perception, provides for an abstract experience on an aesthetic level, develops a perspective of music history, and includes experiences which share equally the processes of performing, discussing, and creating. And then a closing 2 sentences. Music in education becomes a process for engaging the intelligence of the participant. At a personal level, competence in musical understanding gives individuals confidence to respond intelligently to some aspects of their environment and provides informed choices when establishing values about a quality of life. You know, he said a lot of things in really very few words there. I started to photocopy this, I didn't, but if some of you have an interest in that, I don't know if Mr. Teeple has a copy of this, he very well might. but we can, one of us can get it in your hands. What I'd like to ask you is this whole concept about art and education. I first met John Rayforth in 1976 or 77 at the University of Michigan in a summer symposium. And H. Robert Reynolds, who's legendary director of bands over there for a number of years, who's now retired, brought John over because Bob Reynolds had been the band director at UW-Madison prior to that. And so he'd gotten to know John Rayforth as when John was teaching high school. This is like a long time ago. This is like 30 years ago or more. So here I was, a high school band director in Culpeper, Virginia. It's my last year. I had gotten really excited from having gone to a workshop at the University of Michigan the previous summer and had come back. So it must have been 77. And he brought John over to talk with a group of us who were high school band directors and at the time, middle school and all that sort of thing. And I remember John talking about a number of things that were fairly provocative. One of the things he got me to thinking about, even more so, I'd already thought about it a lot, but I disagreed with him slightly at the time. I think maybe I still do, but I don't know, maybe he's changed his mind over the years some too. I won't tell you what his version and my version are, but this whole idea about what constitutes art and what constitutes entertainment, and the question of about art and entertainment, can they be the same? And are they ever different from each other? And if so, how are they different from each other? Because if you think about these sorts of things, then you begin to help yourself not only understand yourself and why you like this tune or that tune, but why this piece is now wearing pretty thin with you, whereas other pieces are getting better and better as life goes on. Because you want your students to have the experiences to get better and better as the weeks go on and after they leave you, as life goes on. I can tell you from personal experience, and I don't mean to be bragging at all, because many, many, many other teachers have had this experience. But I've also found out first for myself, was there were many things I experienced as a student in high school in my concert band experience that I didn't fully understand until many years later. I mean, there were things that happened that I reflected upon later and went, wow. Well, the part about the bragging, if you will, is the years go by, and thank goodness for the internet now and email, because we can find each other much more easily than we used to. I'm hearing from students of mine, little boys and girls who are now 45 and 46 years old, you know, and they share some things with me that remind me of an experience I had in high school. And I can remember one day, it was any old day, it wasn't a special day, it was just any old day. 6-period band, we only had 6 periods in my high school. That was progressive then to have 6 periods. Used to be 5. And band was the last thing. The whole day was like, oh man, I can't wait to get to band rehearsal. And one day we're playing a transcription, a watered down transcription, an arrangement, naughty, naughty, I used to think, of a piece by Wagner, sort of excerpts from the Meister Singer. We got to toward the end. Bum, digga-dum, bum, 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 dee-da-dum. I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, the trees were greener. I mean, it was just like, there was that chill that goes up your spine. It was like my heart was up here and playing my clarinet, and my heart going. Just something happened. Now, my high school band wasn't a great high school band. I thought it was at the time, but in retrospect, I realized it was, you know, it was okay, but it wasn't great. But that day, I had an aesthetic experience, and something was different. I mean, I still wouldn't be able to put it into words all these years later, but it was rather remarkable. I wish I'd had the opportunity to share that with my band director later in life. I mean, I knew it at the time, but I didn't reflect about it. Whoa! You know, I can remember putting my clarinet back in its case and putting it on the shelf. I remember everything that happened, right? I have, you know, and but I never shared that experience with him. He's gone now. He died some years ago. But your students will have those same kinds of experiences. Some of them will realize it at the time for a moment, but they won't reflect upon it for a long time. Maybe not until they have children of their own, or maybe not until they go out to buy a record or a CD and think, gee, I remember that. I think I'll buy a CD. I remember that piece that we did. And it will have an impact on their lives, and you'll never know about it. That's one of the wonderful things about teaching. It's especially wonderful when you find out about it, but you also realize that the things that make teaching a joy aren't how much money you make. Happily, these days, teachers do make enough money to stay alive, but you're not going to retire early, and you're not going to have a home on the Riviera, unless you marry someone who's independently wealthy or something. Then God bless you, but I never wanted a home on the Riviera. But it might be fun to own a Mercedes. Who knows? I'll never know. But that's not why none of us go into. We don't go into teaching for those. We don't go into teaching for those reasons. So think about a variety of those things. Any two of the above three. And the art and entertainment thing. If anybody wants to hang out and not eat supper tonight, I'll hang around. And because it's a discussion I never grow tired of. The whole concept of entertainment, particularly in American culture, and the impact we've had on the world in general in regard to entertainment, whether it's movies or music. All topics are open for discussion. Go in peace.
All business for this month will be taken care of by email.